Welcome to a weekly review of North Dakota's legislative news. Now, here's your host, Dave Thompson, with North Dakota Legislative Review.
And this is North Dakota Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us. The story about higher education changes took an interesting turn this week. As you can recall probably, a task force looking at governance recommended 3 separate boards of higher education. One for UND, one for NDSU, and one for the rest of the colleges. It became a 2-board proposal, one for the 2 research universities and the other for the rest of the institutions. However, the House killed that. Now we have another proposal. The next proposal, which is now in the Senate, would keep 1 board, that is, and would expand the membership from 8 members to 11 members. And the House and Senate committees are working their way through their ethics bills. There are special committees that have been appointed. And one committee has given an okay, the Senate committee has given an okay to its ethics bill. House is still working on that. Floor votes are expected probably early next week. That's something to watch. And also, crossover is coming up. Crossover is the time when the bills from one session are supposed to be acted on or given over to the other House. Well, the Senate is planning to recess on Wednesday. Crossover date is Friday. The House is going to be working some long days and plans to recess on Thursday. And members of the House are still playing catch-up after seeing a large spike in bills this legislative session. This week, the House began to expand its floor session, and it looks like those floor sessions will continue to get longer. Political correspondent Chad Mira caught up with the Assistant Majority Leader and talked about the workload.
Joining us now is Representative Scott Lauser from Minot. Representative, thanks for being here today. Absolutely. You guys have quite a bit of work ahead of you this legislative session. Tell us how much you have on the table on the House side.
Well, we started with a little over 100 bills more than last session and probably another 20 resolutions more than last session, so that would put us around 575 bills and resolutions to hear in less than 2 months to vote on, both in committee and on the floor. We're about 110 bills behind this pace last session.
Yeah, quite a big increase from what we saw just a couple of years ago. How are you handling that extra workload?
Well, we're going to have an adjusted schedule over the next couple days and into next week leading into crossover. So we'll be on the floor Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from 8 to 5 next week. We're probably going to come in the morning at 7:30 on Friday, and we might end up being in a little bit Thursday night as well.
And we've already seen this week sessions start to go a little bit longer. When we start talking about expanding the floor sessions for that many hours, is there any type of fatigue any concerns that lawmakers are facing?
Well, we go into that if we're going to have a 3 or 4 hour session that we know we're going to take a break, maybe a 10 or 15 minute break. Fatigue shouldn't set in because the bills that come in at the end before crossover and the end of session are usually the ones that have a lot of debate. So those have a lot of emotion, a lot of appropriations bills, so it gets our attention. We're able to get through it. And
there really is no wiggle room here. When crossover hits, you guys have to be done, right?
Right. All the bills have to be out of committee. We do have the ethics bill that we extended that deadline because that has an appropriation. But we do have deadlines now. Everything that had an amendment coming out of committee is immediately going to go to the floor, which what we call the 11th order, and potentially up for a debate right on that same day.
Good. Representative Scott Lauser, thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We are now joined by State Senator Larry Robinson. He's from Valley City and a Democrat and a member of Senate Appropriations. Senator, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
Let me just ask you, one thing that we talked about in the beginning of the segment is this whole idea about changing the Board of Higher Education. The 2-board bill is dead basically for now, and the Senate is considering expanding the membership on the Board of Higher Education. Since you work for higher education, where do you come down on that?
Well, it's been an interesting discussion over the course of the interim. You're aware of the governor's task force that initiated this review, and earlier this week when the House elected to not support that package, discussions continued on the Senate side, and what some folks on the Senate side are looking at is expanding the membership. I've worked very closely, obviously. I work at Valley City State University. I've been there a long time, and I can tell you the workload of the State Board of Higher Education is significant. We've had a great board. They spend an inordinate amount of time working with the various institutions, their regular meetings, and keep in mind that during the during the interim between their regular meetings, they're busy with audit committees, presidential searches, and so on. So on the Senate side, the discussion now has turned to increasing the number of members on that board. And I think it makes sense from the standpoint of workload. You know, these folks are citizens, they have families, they have jobs, and you put this all together, we're asking a lot of these people. I do believe that there'll be movement in that direction now, and in fact, just the last couple of days, there's been a lot of discussion in that area, and I think it's something we have to look at pretty seriously. The university system is huge, 40-some thousand students, 11 institutions. The responsibilities for the board are significant.
I know that the current board and the chancellor is talking about multi-subcommittees of the board to look at the 2-year schools, maybe the 4-year schools, and the research universities. Something that
well, that's something that's going to be fleshed out, and I think there's some merit to that. Obviously, we haven't been in a situation to see a final draft of what they're talking about, but it's going to be interesting. But I do think that we need to look at some changes, and I, for one, believe that increasing the size of the board would certainly be a step in the right direction.
Now, since we're talking about higher education, it's a little bit of a, you know, there's some nexus there, but the Senate Appropriations Committee passed a bonding bill. And that's the first time for a long time.
Right.
There's some buildings, and of course there's one building at Valley City State University that apparently is on the wrong side of the dike and could get flooded. And in talking to Senator Holmberg, he said that building needs to be built one way or the other. Is bonding really an option?
Well, we think it is, given the restraints on the state budget. Things are still tight financially. Bonding can make sense. Obviously, we're not going to go overboard with our bonding efforts. But in the case of the building at Valley City State, that particular package and project was approved 4 years ago. And it was approved subject to the general fund ending balance. And if you recall, that general fund didn't end up with a balance sufficient to trigger the construction of that building. Last session, there was no talk, obviously, because of the budget, of any capital improvements. So, you know, the cost of these facilities is not going up. In the case of the building at Valley City, we would be replacing a building that is right on the edge of the river. And the dike is the building's on the wrong side of the dike. And, you know, we haven't had a flood for a few years, but I think it's safe to assume that sooner or later we're going to have a flood. And that would put us in a very challenging situation on the campus. The building that we would replace is our music building. Mm-hmm. At North Dakota State University, they have a dire need for Dunbar Hall. It's a chemistry facility with some serious challenges, safety challenges, and so on. That's a $50-some million project. The one at Valley City is $32 million. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as we move into the second half of the session. The bonding bill did get strong approval on the Senate. I believe it was a unanimous vote with one senator absent.
I think that's right. Since we're talking about finances, that leads me into another thing, and that's the Legacy Fund and some of the demands for the basically earnings of the Legacy Fund. The governor wanted to put $50 million toward a Theodore Roosevelt library. There was a proposal to move some people out of the New England prison to Bismarck, so Bismarck prison to Jamestown. And it's my perception, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, that there's a little bit of a tough sled for both of those proposals.
Well, it's challenging because change is always difficult, in our state probably even more so. As I understand, the House has not reached consensus on what they want to do with the New England facility. There are a number of issues moving the female residents to south side of Bismarck and some of our men to New England. There's healthcare issues, there's employment issues, there's housing issues. There's a lot of issues that surface immediately. I think the good thing is there's ongoing discussion. We're looking at some options. The corrections budget is going to come over to the Senate side second half. We are just wrapping up the Human Services bill, and that impacts the Jamestown facility. So that discussion is going to continue, and I would suggest that there won't be a decision reached on that until the wee hours of this 2019 legislative session.
Probably that, and also the Theodore Roosevelt Library, which...
Exactly. A lot of discussion on that, and that's I think that issue is alive. There's just it's a big piece. and there's a lot of eyes on the legacy fund earnings, and that'll flush out as we get into the second half of the session. And I've been told, I've been around a few years, and you have to be a bit more serious in the second half, because one, you're running out of time, and two, we got to start making some decisions. The puzzle has to start coming together. And I think we've had a good, productive first half in both the House and the Senate. We'll wrap up and go into crossover next week. And then we come back, and we're going to have to start putting that budget together, and the various pieces of the puzzle hopefully will come together in the next number of weeks.
And then when you come back, there's going to be the new revenue forecast, which will tell a lot of the story.
Exactly. We're all waiting to see that in early March, and to see what that tells us regarding the ongoing revenue for the state of North Dakota. We've had a flat ag commodity picture out there in terms of our farmers and ranchers, great crops and so on, but prices have not been there. Thank goodness for the record crops in many areas. And certainly the challenge in the western part of the state with oil prices being a bit softer than we had hoped.
Yeah, it isn't quite as bad as it was when you came in 17, where there had been allocations already, allotments, and then you had to do some cuts of a budget, which hadn't happened for a little while.
You're exactly right. In 17, it was a pretty dire situation, and we had budget cuts across the board, and many agencies, higher ed, for example, I believe pushing 20%. The Department of Commerce received a significant cut, and we were fortunate that we had some reserve funds, a rainy day fund, the SIF fund, and so on, that helped us get through that really tough 2-year period. So things are better, but we're not out of the woods. The farm economy and the challenge with commodity prices, not only in the farm side of things and ranch, but the energy. You put the two together, and I think all of us are a little concerned, very concerned, and just really waiting to see what happens in March.
Since you brought that up, one of the other things that it's a new proposal, and that's the prairie dog bill that Senator Wardner has been trying to shepherd through, and also Representative Nathy on the House side. Not exactly sure where it's going. There seems to be an awful lot of support, at least in concept, but are there pitfalls possible with that one?
Well, I'm pretty optimistic. That bill is still in the House. I think it's going to come out of the House, has to in the next few days. I know Senator Wardner and Representative Nathy put an inordinate amount of work into that bill over the course of the summer. I signed on as a co-sponsor because we have a dire need in every corner of the state to address infrastructure needs. Our DOT budget, which is in the House, going to come to the Senate, as you know, is tight. There's not an appetite for gas tax increases. We haven't had a gas tax increase for a number of years, but costs keep going up, and we're getting a lot of traffic. Even in our ag sector, the number of semis on farms has just really exploded over the last number of years. And our school buses drive on those roads, and all of us in a rural state, an agricultural state. Our system of transportation is absolutely critical to our well-being and our quality of life. So I believe that bill is going to find its way, and I think it's going to receive broad-based support. It's not a cure-all, but it's going to go a long ways to helping with needy projects throughout the state of North Dakota.
Well, this gives you an idea about how many subjects you have to deal with in a short 80-day session, because I really did want to ask you about IT, information technology. You were on interim committees that did some study. There's this whole proposal for consolidation of IT, and I'm hearing that, again, some resistance to change, perhaps.
It's my understanding that the IT unification proposal has not fared well in the House. That bill now will come to the Senate. The bottom line, whether we like it or not, IT is a driving factor in our lives today. Literally everything we do is tied into technology in one way or another. We're also challenged trying to build in efficiencies and streamline cost control. We have some areas where we have some increased costs. The ITD director, Sean Riley, and his staff, I think, are doing a great job analyzing the big picture and trying to identify ways that we can contain costs, but also invest in cybersecurity. That's been a big issue. We are going through hacks every minute, thousands and thousands and thousands. I think it's over the course of the year, we're looking at millions. And our private records, our financial records, and so on, We've got to protect them. We have a responsibility to do so. And so there will be a number of FTEs hired in that area. And the thought is we're going to reshuffle, reassign, retrain, repurpose, and in the process try to come through with a stronger, more efficient, more responsive information technology department. And I think they've been doing a great job already, but the demands are such that we can't sit still. We got to constantly move forward and not let folks run over us.
So you are on board with consolidation?
Yes, I am, and I think the Senate we're passing bills out with the consolidation or unification, whatever you call it, in all of the bills.
Yeah, I think some people call it consolidation, some people call it unification.
Right.
There has been some pushback from a couple of state agencies, but
yep.
You know, I don't know if it's really serious at this point.
Well, I would agree, and I think at the end of the day, I think we're going to realize that we have to move in this direction. And again, it's change, and change is tough to come by, but in my opinion, it's the right thing to do.
All right, early on, the bar was set in the Senate about not only raises, but also how budgets are going to be handled. 2% the first year of the biennium, 3% of the second year of the biennium. Right. That includes nursing homes and a lot of things, but just on the 2 and 3 concept, how are you dealing with that?
Well, we entered this session in January knowing full well that many of our providers were struggling, and our nursing homes, and I don't want to stereotype all of them, but as an industry, they're very challenged. Many of them are operating in red ink. The nursing home in my community is a beautiful facility and a lot of pride in that facility, but they have close to 40 vacancies in staff. The ability to retain and recruit quality staff is really an issue. Financially, the overhead, the dollars haven't been there. We didn't do much for these folks 2 years ago. So the issue is somewhat compounded. They have asked for a 3 and a 3. We call them inflators to cover overhead, salary and fringe, and other costs. The governor's budget was at 1 and 1. The Senate, at this point in time, we are in agreement to be at 2 and 3. I believe the House is at 2 and 2. That's going to be an issue that, again, will probably be addressed late in the session. I would hope that we can find a way to get to 3 and 3. That's really, in my opinion, the minimum that they need to be able to get by, and maybe a little catch up. But you know, a test of any generation it really boils down to how we care for our most vulnerable, our seniors, our children, our veterans, etc. And we've got to step to the plate and get the job done in that area.
I know that Senator Wardner, as what he called a stopgap bill, introduced a provider tax.
Yes.
That did fail, but that's something that still could be in the back pocket.
Well, and Senator Wardner did announce on the floor that we'll be making every effort as we get into the second part of this legislative session to identify that other 1%. And we have a great relationship with the senator, and again, there's so many pieces to this puzzle, and at the end of the day, they all have to fit together. And just because we're at 2 and 3 now, in no way suggests that's where we're going to end up come late April.
And of course, 2 and 3 also mean state employee raises.
Exactly, and we've had significant turnover, early retirements the last 2 years in the area of state employee workforce. I know in higher education alone, we've reduced the FTE counts by about 700, and our employees are. We've got a great state employee workforce. They too have gone without increases. And you know, we can't be at training grounds. We've got to keep up with the private sector to the extent we can. And I think, again, the 2 and 3 that we have, if we have any way possible to get to 3 and 3, is important. I think it's also important to note that we have agreed, and it's my understanding the House and the Senate are on the same page, to continue the health care package. And you know, it's interesting to note that just to continue that $28 a month participation that the governor had proposed is another $12 million. So we're talking about significant dollars, and but we're talking also about supporting our state employee workforce, and that's got to be a high priority. And I would hope that we're able to get there prior to the end of the session. Again, time is of essence, but we'll work on this up to the closing hours of the session. And that's one of those issues that will be finalized sometime in the last week or two.
We only have about a minute left, so I have to ask this question.
Yes.
Are we now facing a time where you're going to have to meet annually?
Well, there was a proposal, Senator Brad Beckedahl from Williston, who's on our Appropriations Committee and a great guy, had proposed that we look at that and look at that seriously. He put an inordinate amount of work into that bill, and the concept that he provided was a very short 3 or 4 day kind of budget adjustment session on even numbered years. I supported it. It did not, was not approved by the Senate. But I think increasingly, when we look at the extreme situation we've been, a couple of years ago we had sufficient funds. In fact, some would say excess funds. And then 2 years ago, we went way back and we had significant reductions. I don't know of any business the size of the state of North Dakota where you're looking at a budget the size of the state of North Dakota that operates when the board of directors meet every other year.
That's right.
So I think there's merit to it. Again, it's a departure. I know several years ago, and I've been in the Senate for about 30 years, former Senator Riley Redlin championed that cause session after session after session, and he was a believer in the concept that we should meet and have that budget adjustment session. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I think it'll eventually be here.
Eventually it will. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's
Senator Larry Robinson
good to be here.
from
Thank
Valley
you very
City.
much.
Thank you. The number of people who have applied for medical marijuana cards is not anywhere near the number originally expected at this point. The program is designed to pay for itself through various fees collected by the state. But if the patient numbers don't pick up, that revenue could take a hit.
Medical marijuana isn't too far off.
We've currently harvested 3 different times.
And it's a big harvest for Pure Dakota COO Casey Newman.
We currently are growing 1,000 plants.
We're not allowed inside the manufacturing facility, but you can imagine what it takes.
You'll probably have around 125 lights in one room. There are 315 watts a piece. They're a full spectrum light, so it does get awful close to mirroring the sun.
Pure Dakota has 1,000 plants, but right now there are only 110 patients and another 100 applicants for the whole state.
It's been very difficult to identify what the true qualifying patient population number will be in North Dakota.
So difficult, the state has drastically lowered its patient projections. When the law was first passed 2 years ago, the state estimated we would have 3,800 patients and 1,900 designated caregivers in 2019. The Department of Health presented lawmakers with new projections last month. The numbers are down significantly. 1,800 fewer patients and 1,550 fewer caregivers.
Check out this graph. This is how the Department of Health breaks down its revenue sources for the medical marijuana program. This blue piece of the pie, the largest piece. These are fees just from dispensaries and manufacturers, 67%. It's the largest chunk. But the second biggest piece, this gray area here, these are fees just from patients and designated caregivers. That's 24% of the projected revenue, obviously a very important part to funding the state's medical marijuana program.
A lower than expected qualifying patient number may have an impact on the ability for the program to pay for itself, and we are prepared for that. We would have some carryover dollars that may be available.
To adjust for the lower patient count, the state has lowered its revenue projections by 29%. The Grand Forks dispensary might be the first one to open. I talked to CEO Sarah Gullickson about the patient numbers.
We're not looking to service hundreds of patients the first day of opening if the program's a little bit slower to grow. And that obviously feeds right into our staffing model. And to make sure that we don't overstaff.
It's not necessarily a shock to those involved in the industry. After all, even with an ID, you can't get medical marijuana right now because no dispensary has opened.
The data that's been presented in the last 5 years is showing that normally the numbers are very similar to where North Dakota's at now until the first dispensary is open.
Wall said another part of the problem is getting healthcare providers on board.
A healthcare provider has to complete a written certification form as part of the patient application.
2 House bills being considered this legislative session would change the wording on those forms in hopes of making doctors more comfortable with it. Other bills would add qualifying conditions like autism, migraines, and eating disorders. These bills could boost patient count in the long term. In the short term, Gullickson is looking forward to opening day.
Our goal the first day that we open, if we service 5 patients, that's great.
She says that could be in April.
And our political correspondent Chad Mira joins us. Chad, you've been talking to legislators. Do they ever tell you that maybe part of the reason why the numbers haven't been so robust is because it's taken a while to roll it out?
Well, that's definitely a large piece of the puzzle. Like I mentioned in the story there, they're not necessarily surprised by this. And from what we've seen in other states, once dispensaries start to open, historically, states see a bit of a spike in enrollment. So they're not too concerned yet about where the numbers are the way they are. They do have goals for where they want to be by the end of the year. But it certainly has, it's been a process rolling out the program. And I think they're all, though, just excited to finally be getting some dispensaries opening here in a couple months.
Do you think these bills that are introduced to kind of broaden who's can access medical marijuana, do you think they have some legs?
Well, there is some support for these. They've gotten some due passes out of committee, but something important to keep in mind that lawmakers are telling me is because this is a bill that was started as an initiated measure, if there are going to be any serious changes to the language in these bills, they need a 2/3 vote. So they need pretty broad support. And, you know, medical marijuana, although growing in popularity across the country, there are still people, it's still a hot button issue. There are still people that aren't convinced of the benefits of it and might still vote against some of these amendments.
And that might be one issue you're going to be following for a while. So.
Absolutely. We'll be keeping an eye on it for a long time, I'm sure.
Thanks, Chad. You have been watching and listening to Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us.